Well, hello and welcome back. You are watching a podcast series that we're calling America Under Fire, The Old Guy Speaks. And this will be segment 12, Immigration. Weaponized, mass, illegal immigration is a very effective way to weaken and destroy a nation. It strains and drains all kinds of infrastructure: medical systems, welfare systems, housing, school systems, law enforcement, public safety, and so on. It allows our enemies to insert large numbers of criminal, military, and political opponents, none of whom are here to learn our language, to adopt our ways, or to become one of us. A recent Epoch Times article quotes communism expert Trevor Loudon as saying that mass illegal immigration is being used to, quote, destroy the United States politically, culturally, economically, and even geographically, close quote. Joseph Humire of the Center for a Secure Free Society similarly says it's being weaponized to overwhelm and destabilize the U.S. and ultimately break it apart. Here's some information from a man named Todd Bensman of the Center for Immigration Studies, who advises that illegal immigration has now, quote, smashed every record, unquote. As of January 2024, the U.S. Border Patrol had to handle a human tsunami of previously unfathomable size. More than 7.6 million border crossers in 36 months, meaning since the inaugural of January 2021. And the percentage of illegals allowed to stay is now approaching 100%. President Obama's Director of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, reportedly told MSNBC that in his time, he considered it bad if apprehensions exceeded 1,000 a day, because anything more than that, quote, overwhelms the system, unquote. Over the past 3 years, apprehensions have averaged about 6,940 per day, about 7 times Mr. Johnson's system overwhelmed threshold. The Trump administration had brought apprehensions down to 800 to 1,500 per day, but as we entered 2024, apprehensions were up to 12,000 to 15,000 per day. That alone is more than a tenfold increase. Then factor in the gotaways, and you get a 3-year total from January 21 to January 24 of illegal immigrants of 10 million, a number equivalent to the population of the greater Chicago area. So here's a rhetorical question for you, and I think it makes sense. If not, please forgive. In those 3 years, 21 to 24, in the U.S., have we graduated or otherwise added an increased number of doctors, nurses, teachers, police, firefighters, sewage plant operators, etc., to serve an entirely new population equal to that of the greater Chicago area? I'm not talking about the normal replacement numbers needed to replace older retiring workers with new younger workers, but rather an additional number above and beyond the replacement numbers, because we're talking about an entirely new population equal to the greater Chicago area. And have we built an additional amount or number of new hospitals, schools, housing, fire stations, police stations, water and sewage plants, electric generating stations, and so on, to serve an entirely new population equal to the greater Chicago area? I've heard a new radio ad for something recently. I'm not sure what. I don't recall. I think it was this year. that ends with a guy saying, "You think about that." So that's my message too. The dismissal by our government of hundreds of thousands of cases of immigration law violations is also unprecedented. And never before had our U.S. government, in Mr. Bensman's words, explicitly refused to enforce immigration laws requiring detention and deportation of illegal immigrants. The one piece of good news is for the Mexican crime syndicates, whose proceeds from human smuggling are now surpassing those from drug smuggling for the first time. So business is booming for them. I have to mention a recent article I saw regarding one specific component of the crisis: immigration from South America. You can't drive a car all the way from North America to South America because there's a 59-mile, soon to be a 55-mile stretch of swamp in Panama that hasn't yet been bridged by the Pan American Highway, the Darien Gap. Last year, a record 500,000 illegals traveled through the Darien Gap, utilizing 4 large migrant camps: Lajas Blancas, Bajo Chiquito, San Vicente, and Canaan Membril. Please pardon if I butchered those names. With administrative headquarters at a former U.S. military base in Panama, now called the City of Knowledge. Your tax dollars at work. The camps are not funded solely by Marxist NGOs, NGO meaning non-government organization, but also by agencies of the United Nations under a 2018 UN Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, which strangely enough, the U.S. currently supports. The UN and the NGOs provide food, medical care, transportation, detailed migration routes to the U.S., and cell phones for all. And I suspect that the UN programs operate in many places other than in the Darien Gap. The U.S. gave more than $1 billion to the UN in 2023. So in that way, in addition to others, we're funding our own demise via the UN. Trevor Loudon calls the UN effort, quote, 100% a communist program to bring this country to its knees, unquote. Marxist groups here in the U.S. say that the southern border is the road to the American Revolution. The southern border is the road to the American Revolution. And they're working to give illegals not primarily sustenance, but more importantly, political clout and the right to vote in U.S. elections. Squib. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, has a cell phone scheduling app, CBP One, by which an aspiring immigrant may call ahead when approaching certain U.S. border points of entry to schedule an entrance interview. The Center for Immigration Studies advises that in 2023, the CBP allowed at least 320,000 inadmissible immigrants with no right to enter the country to fly directly to 43 U.S. airports, which I assume would not all be point-of-entry locations, to interview and enter the U.S., and that CBP has refused to disclose the names of the 43 airports, nor the airports from which the 320,000 plus illegals departed. The phone app spreads out the flow of illegals and provides a false impression of fewer illegal crossings. So the situation is dire. Now, with all that said, let's look at the other side of the coin, because there is another side. It's hard to write and talk about immigration because we esteem traditional values like the Bible story of the Good Samaritan who graciously helped a beaten and discarded member of a different society. And the U.S. does have a distinguished history of welcoming migrants to this land. My own great-grandfather was brought here in 1848 to escape poverty and hunger under the elites, meaning the aristocracy in Wales. But our immigration system is being deliberately overwhelmed and broken, made into a weapon to be used against us. The Good Samaritan was not presented with 100 beaten and discarded men along that road, nor was the innkeeper to whom he entrusted and paid for the man's care. There are profound differences in the two scenarios, making it a false comparison. Nonetheless, if the illegal immigrant has settled here, even while awaiting adjudication, if the U.S. government does not send them back whence they came, the people of God in America will always extend a hand to help those in need, regardless of who they are. It's a unique and wonderful phenomenon, somewhat akin to the U.S. soldier in war helping a wounded enemy, a part of the Christian heritage here in America, which we'll discuss later. And that completes our immigration segment. I thank you for watching.